from within and spreads instability abroad. Democracy is obviously no guarantee of peace, but it is the most effective system we have to prevent violence and conflict. This line of reasoning often prompts a well-known counter-argument, that democracy itself causes unrest and conflict, that demanding freedom is dangerous. This is an old claim. Authoritarian leaders have used it for generations to defend their positions of power. Today, they supercharge the argument with disinformation and propaganda, two of their essential weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, as citizens of a democracy, we have a duty to be critical of information sources. Alarm bells should ring when the views we express are identical to those disseminated by one of the world's most manipulative disinformation systems. For in that case, we are not just spreading information, we are spreading the strategic propaganda of a dictator. What are we all to think when we read that it's the Venezuelan opposition that is threatening the country with war, that the democratic movement desire an invasion, when the narrative is turned upside down and when the victims are branded as aggressors? This is a version of reality that the Maduro regime tells the world, that it is the guarantor of peace. But peace based on fear, silence, and torture is no peace. It is submission depicted as stability. No, the source of the violence is not the democracy activists. It is those at the top who refuse to cede power. It was not Nelson Mandela who made South Africa violent, but the apartheid regime's crackdown on demands for equality. Opposition groups did not start the imprisonments in Belarus, the executions in Iran, or the persecution in Venezuela. The violence comes from authoritarian regimes as they lash out against popular calls for change. Peace and democracy cannot be separated without draining both of meaning. Lasting peace depends on the rule of law, political participation, and respect for human dignity. Before we can discuss political disagreements, we must establish some form of democracy. Without it, there is no meaningful distinction between right and left, no way to legitimately disagree, no genuine politics. Democracy is not an expendable luxury. It is not an ornament to be put on a shelf. Democracy is hard work. It is action and negotiation. It is a living obligation. The instruments of democracy are the instruments of peace. We gather here today, therefore, to defend something far more important than either side of a political or ideological divide. We gather to defend democracy itself, the very foundation on which lasting peace rests. When people refuse to surrender democracy, they refuse to surrender peace. One who understands this is María Corina Machado. As a founder of Sumate, an organization devoted to building democracy, Ms. Machado stepped forward to advocate free and fair elections more than 2 decades ago. As she herself put it, it was a choice of ballots over bullets. In political office and in her service to organizations, Ms. Machado has spoken out for judicial independence, human rights, and popular representation. She has spent years working for the freedom of the Venezuelan people. The presidential election of 2024 was a key factor in the selection of this year's Peace Prize. Ms. Machado was the opposition presidential candidate and the country's unifying voice of hope. When the regime blocked her candidacy, the movement might have collapsed, but through her support behind Edmundo González Urrutia and the opposition stayed together. The opposition found common ground in the demand for free elections and representative government. This is the very foundation of democracy, our shared willingness to defend the principle of popular rule, even if you disagree on policy. At a time when democracy is under threat around the world, it is more important than ever to defend this common ground. Hundreds of thousands of volunteers mobilized across political divides. They were trained as election observers and used technology in new ways to document each step of the election. Up to 1 million people stood watch over polling stations around the country. They uploaded vote tallies, photographed records, and secured copies before the regime could destroy them. They defended this documentation with their lives, then made sure the world learned the result of the election. This was grassroots mobilization, unlike any that Venezuelan and probably the world had ever seen. Ordinary citizens from all walks of life carrying out systematic, high-tech documentary work in an atmosphere of threats, surveillance, and violence. The efforts of this democracy movement, both before and after the election, were innovative and brave, peaceful and democratic. The opposition received international support when its leaders publicized the vote counts that were collected from the country's election districts, showing that the opposition had won by a clear margin. But the regime denied it all. It falsified the election result and clung to power violently. For the past year, Ms. Machado has had to live in hiding. Despite serious threats, she has remained in the country, an inspiration to millions. She is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025 for her tireless work promoting democratic rights of the people of Venezuela and for her struggle to achieve a peaceful and just transition from dictatorship to democracy. For a long time, the opposition in Venezuela has relied on democracy's toolbox to wage its peaceful civilian campaign. Over the years, Ms. Machado and her allies have had to adapt and change tactics. They've applied almost every democratic tool, from election boycotts when the system was too rotten, to participation when small openings in the process made it possible. They've tried dialogue, organization, mobilization, and extensive election documentation. Ms. Machado has appealed for international attention, support, and pressure, not for an invasion of Venezuela. She has urged people to stand up for their rights using peaceful, democratic means. Peace research shows it clearly. Widespread, non-violent mobilization is among the most effective methods of achieving political change in a dictatorship. When a population mobilizes and the international community exerts strong pressure and the security forces refrain from using violence against its population, a tipping point may arrive.